From the beaches of Normandy to the streets of Berlin, from the sands of North Africa to the jungles of Burma, one thing determined victory more than anything else: steel. Rolling steel that could punch through enemy lines, absorb punishment, and keep pushing forward when everything else failed. These were the Allied tanks of World War II, and without them, history would have been written very differently. Picture this. You're a German panzer commander in 1944, scanning the horizon through your periscope. Suddenly, the ground begins to shake. Not from artillery, not from bombs, but from something far more terrifying. An endless stream of Allied armor stretching beyond what your eyes can see. Sherman after Sherman, Churchill after Churchill, T-34 after T-34, rolling forward like an unstoppable tide of liberation. This wasn't just warfare anymore. This was industrial might transformed into pure, overwhelming force. But here's what most people don't realize about Allied tank development during the war. It wasn't just about building bigger guns or thicker armor. It was about solving problems that no one had ever faced before. How do you mass-produce reliable tanks when your factories are being bombed nightly? How do you design armor that can survive in the frozen steppes of Russia and the scorching deserts of Africa? How do you create machines that can be operated by farm boys from Kansas and factory workers from Detroit with just weeks of training? The answers to these questions shape not just the war, but the entire future of armored warfare. And today, we're diving deep into every single Allied tank that rolled into battle. From the early disasters that almost cost the Allies everything, to the legendary machines that became symbols of victory itself. We're going to explore the American workhorses that proved quantity has a quality all its own. The British heavyweights that could absorb punishment like nothing else on Earth. The Soviet juggernauts that turned the tide on the Eastern Front. And yes, even the forgotten experiments and prototypes that pushed the boundaries of what was possible with 1940s technology. But first, let me paint you a picture of just how desperate things were in the beginning. When Germany unleashed its blitzkrieg tactics across Europe, Allied tank forces were caught completely off guard. The French had more tanks than the Germans, but they were scattered, poorly coordinated, and designed for a different kind of war entirely. The British had brave crews, but machines that belonged in the previous decade. The Americans? They barely had any tanks worth mentioning at all. Everything had to be learned the hard way. In the burning wreckage of France. In the unforgiving desert campaigns of North Africa. Through trial and error, success and catastrophic failure, the Allied nations slowly figured out what worked and what got you killed. They learned that reliability mattered more than raw power. That ease of production trumped perfection. That crew survival was just as important as enemy destruction. And then something remarkable happened. The same industrial capacity that had built skyscrapers and automobiles turned its attention to war machines. Factories that once produced tractors began churning out tanks by the thousands. Assembly lines perfected for civilian goods were retooled for armor plate and gun barrels. The arsenal of democracy wasn't just a slogan anymore. It became the hammer that would reshape the world. Each Allied nation brought something unique to the table. The Americans brought mass production techniques that no one thought possible. Their tanks might not have been the most sophisticated, but they could build them faster and in greater numbers than anyone else in history. The British contributed engineering excellence and battlefield experience, creating specialized vehicles for every conceivable situation. The Soviets. They brought a ruthless practicality that stripped away everything unnecessary and focused on one thing only: killing German tanks. But the real story isn't just about the machines themselves. It's about the desperate race against time to get these weapons into the hands of crews who could use them effectively. It's about the countless modifications made in field workshops under enemy fire. It's about the evolution from early war failures to late war masterpieces that could go toe-to-toe with anything the Axis powers could field. We're going to examine every major tank type, every variant, every specialized vehicle that contributed to Allied victory. From the tiny reconnaissance tanks that served as the eyes and ears of advancing armies, to the massive tank destroyers that could knock out the heaviest German armor from miles away. From amphibious tanks that stormed Pacific beaches, to flame-throwing monsters that cleared bunkers and fortifications. This is the complete story of Allied armor in World War II. The machines that carried democracy on their backs and freedom in their guns. Let's start with the early war period, when Allied tank development was frankly a disaster waiting to happen. The M3 Lee represented everything wrong with American tank design philosophy in 1941. Picture a tank so tall it looked like a barn on tracks, mounting its main gun in the hull instead of a proper turret. Why? Because American engineers couldn't figure out how to mass-produce large turret rings fast enough. So they stuck a 75mm gun in the side of the tank and called it a day. British crews nicknamed it the Grant, and while they appreciated the firepower, they also knew they were driving around in what amounted to a mobile coffin. The Lee stood nearly 10 feet tall, making it impossible to hide behind anything smaller than a 2-story building. German anti-tank gunners could spot these things from miles away. But here's the thing that nobody talks about. The M3 Lee wasn't supposed to be good. It was supposed to be available. And in 1942, available trumped everything else. Meanwhile, the British were fielding the A-13 cruiser tanks, machines that looked impressive on paper, but had a disturbing tendency to catch fire when hit. The early war British approach to tank design seemed to focus on speed over everything else, which worked great until you actually encountered enemy fire. These tanks were fast, lightly armoured, and equipped with guns that couldn't penetrate anything more substantial than a bicycle. The A-15 Crusader continued this tradition of prioritising mobility over survivability. Crews joked that the only thing more dangerous than facing a German Panzer in a Crusader was trying to keep the thing running long enough to reach the battlefield. Mechanical reliability was apparently considered an optional feature in early British tank design. Then came the game changers. The M4 Sherman wasn't the biggest tank on the battlefield, wasn't the most heavily armoured, and certainly wasn't the most powerful. But it had something that German tanks increasingly lacked as the war progressed. It was reliable, it was repairable, and most importantly, it was everywhere. Ford, Chrysler, and other American manufacturers didn't just build Shermans. They revolutionized tank production entirely. The Sherman represented a fundamental shift in thinking. Instead of handcrafting perfect machines like German tanks, Americans focused on building good enough machines in overwhelming quantities. A Sherman might not win a one-on-one duel with a Tiger, but 5 Shermans versus 1 Tiger? That was a different story entirely. And America could build 5 Shermans in the time it took Germany to build 1 Tiger. British tank development took a completely different approach with the Churchill series. These weren't fast tanks. They weren't elegant tanks. They were mobile bunkers designed to absorb punishment and keep moving forward. The Churchill Mark VII could take hits that would destroy any other Allied tank and keep fighting. Its armour was so thick that German gunners often watched in disbelief as their shells simply bounced off. But the real revolution was happening on the Eastern Front. The Soviet T-34 changed everything. When German forces first encountered these tanks in 1941, they couldn't believe what they were seeing. Here was a tank with sloped armour that deflected their best anti-tank rounds. A gun that could penetrate German armour at ranges German guns couldn't match. And most importantly, it was being produced in numbers that defied comprehension. The T-34 wasn't just a tank. It was a philosophy. Every unnecessary component was stripped away. Crew comfort? Irrelevant. Complex optics? Waste of resources. What mattered was armour, gun, and the ability to roll off production lines faster than Germany could destroy them. Soviet factories were producing T-34s at a rate of over 1,000 per month by 1943. The KV-1 heavy tank took Soviet design philosophy even further. This was a machine designed for one purpose: breaking through German defences regardless of cost. Early KV-1s were nearly invulnerable to German anti-tank weapons, causing panic among Wehrmacht forces who found their standard tactics completely useless against these steel monsters. From those desperate early days, when Allied tanks were little more than mobile targets, to the final push into Germany, where columns of Shermans, Churchills, and T-34s rolled through the rubble of the Third Reich, we've witnessed one of history's greatest industrial transformations. These weren't just machines of war, they were symbols of free nations that refused to surrender, that turned their entire economies into weapons factories, that proved democracy could outproduce and outfight tyranny. The Allied victory wasn't won by superior individual tanks. It was won by superior production, superior logistics, and superior determination. While Germany perfected the Tiger and Panther, America perfected the assembly line. While German engineers obsessed over technical superiority, Soviet designers focused on battlefield effectiveness. While the Wehrmacht struggled with fuel shortages and spare parts, Allied tank crews knew that reinforcements were always coming. These tanks carried more than just guns and armor. They carried the hopes of occupied nations, the determination of free peoples, and the promise that fascism would not inherit the earth. Every Sherman that rolled off the production line, every Churchill that absorbed another hit and kept fighting, every T-34 that smashed through German defenses brought the world one step closer to liberation. The steel that won World War II wasn't just forged in factories, it was forged in the hearts of men and women who understood that some things are worth fighting for, worth dying for, worth building an entire arsenal of democracy to defend.